New information tonight. The Sullivan County mother accused of killing her 15-month-old toddler appeared in court today. Megan Boswell is accused of killing her child, Evelyn. The court is reviewing whether certain evidence, including photos from the crime scene and the autopsy, can be used at her trial. A forensic pathologist today testified she believes the child died of asphyxiation, and the TBI revealed her body was found in a trash can.
All right. First case we'll take up is State of Tennessee versus Megan Boswell. I need to bring her in the courtroom. Case 72860. Ms. Boswell's down in court. It's come to my attention that first thing we need to take up is a request by Ms. Boswell. Raise your right hand. Solemnly swear from testimony about to give you the truth, the whole truth, and the truth.
Yes, Your Honor.
So what's on your mind?
Due to differences of opinion on my case with Mr. Scrolls, I feel uncomfortable concurrently, going forward and representing me. I would ask the court to appoint me to counsel.
Differences of opinion coming together. We have to be more specific than that. Because at the end of the day, whether the lawyer agrees with whatever your decision is, he or she is bound to go forward if it's within the bounds of the law, if it's legal, bound to go forward with what you want as far as your defense. So. Wait just a second.
Your Honor, we just don't agree on how to proceed going forward with my case. And we're having a lot of difficulties, even preparing for today.
Judge, that
I talked to her before we came out here, talked to the state, whatever it is. I met with Ms. Boswell a few times leading up to the day of operation. I have to say, in all candor in the court, that our relationship has deteriorated to the point where we might be able to effectively prepare for this. Just have concerns moving forward. If we can't work together to prepare for promotion here, how do we prepare for trial?
I guess I'm just not understanding what we're here for. I don't know how you could be at odds with preparing for today's hearing. The state wants certain pictures in, you want certain pictures kept out. There's no, unless she wanted these pictures to come in at trial. It's not making sense to me, is what I'm trying to say. And I know there's a lot that you have talked about with her, that she has talked about with you, and you can't tell me. And I understand. But I'm gonna have to have more than, well, we just don't, what it sounds like is, well, he didn't get a good enough plea deal, or he thinks I should plead, I want to go to trial. You know, those are not valid reasons to fire your lawyer. If that's it, then the request is denied. But if it goes, it's going to have to go further than that for me to consider this. Because this is going to delay, this case has been delayed and delayed. A lot of TBI getting information back, but part of it's been because there's so much material that you've had to go through to get ready to even get to where we are right now. And literally, if we change lawyers today, that's going to delay this thing probably a whole nother year. So I need to know why I should put this case on a year long. If you can tell me.
Judge, are you asking me?
Either one. I'm asking Carlos Schroeder, please.
Your Honor, we're having differences. I can't go into all the details. I don't want to give up on the plan for my defense, but there are witnesses and things that I feel like need to be done that we're having differences on as well.
Well, I guess I'm going to ask the next question is that you understand whatever lawyer you have, they have to decide, you can tell them to subpoena everybody in the sheriff's department, all 450 employees, however many there are. But to have a witness come in here and testify, they have to be relevant to the case. They have to have knowledge about the case. So if you're just wanting him to subpoena, I've had cases where, especially in drug cases, the defendant wanted his lawyer to subpoena 25 people from around the state who are in TDOC to come up here and be brought to Sullivan County. Well, if they had information, that's fine. If they don't have information, no, they're not coming up here. They're not going to do it. And Mr. Sproles or any lawyer has to make a determination as to whether, one, there's relevance to the testimony, and two, whether it's within, that relevance is within the bounds of our rules of procedure that you could even bring them in to testify. So,
Your Honor, the witnesses I'm talking about are like forensic evidence witnesses that I feel like I need for my defense.
Mr. Sproles, you want to comment on that or respond?
Judge, I said my position. My concerns are just what I stated. I think our ability to communicate is
You understand that if I grant your request, and I'm not saying I'm going to, but if I grant your request, it's going to delay your case significantly.
Yes, sir, Your Honor.
And there's no guarantee that your next lawyer is going to agree that whatever forensic examinations you think need to be done. You understand that?
Yes, sir, Your Honor.
Mr. Sproles, I have to ask you this question. Do you believe that the attorney-client relationship is at a point where it's irrevocably broken and it cannot be fixed?
I'm not trying to be evasive in my answer, but I don't know. At this point, as far as just gauging on preparing for today, I would say yes. If you want me to continue to try to mint things, I serve with pleasure before. Going forward, I can't say, but if you ask me just based on preparations for today's hearing, I would answer yes.
Based on your answer, Mr. Stoll, I'm going to deny the request at this time. But I would expect that if you get to that point, you would notify the court sooner than later.
Yes, sir.
All right, the next thing is we're here on the state's amended second motion and amendment with regard to photographs. General, are you ready to proceed on that?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Stoll, are you ready to proceed on that?
We are, Judge.
Go ahead, General.
Your Honor, the first point of business is we would like to introduce Exhibits 1 through 28, which have been stipulated to be introduced for the purpose of this hearing. And Mr. Sproles has an identical copy of the exhibits. There are a number of exhibits that are not stipulated that should be admitted for trial, but for the purpose of this hearing, we have 28 exhibits marked for this hearing. Is that correct, Mr. Sproles?
That's correct.
So we'd like to introduce that at this time.
And Judge, just to add to that, two of those exhibits are not photographs. They're the CD of Dr. Luce.
The other is her report.
Yes. Other than that, they're pictures.
And of those, the first 11 have been stipulated to, for this, not contested. There will be 12 through 26 that will be the center of this hearing. That will be for contention, whether admissible or not at trial.
And I think, Judge, there's a previously filed written submission for stipulation like that.
There is. It's in the court. It was filed yesterday, day before yesterday. So from this exhibits 1 through 11, by stipulation and by agreement of the parties, will be available as evidence in the trial. The exhibits that I've been handed also have descriptions attached to each one. As well as 12 through 26. And just so the record, the two exhibits that are not photographs are exhibit 27, which is Dr. Volution's CD, and exhibit 28, which is Dr. Volution's report.
You know, we also have an agreed order that we'd like to take the order we'd like to submit. essentially what we've agreed to, that all pleadings, exhibits, photographs, and other documents that are part of this hearing be placed in seal at the conclusion of this hearing.
Grant that for publicity reasons. That's not unusual.
Thank you. Okay, we'll take the photographs one at a time. Again, we get this
Generally, you want to talk about them individually?
You know, what we plan to do is, our first witness will be Agent Fraylin, to set the background for those photographs. And then once his testimony, cross-examination is completed, then I will call Dr. Malusnik, and we will go, first we will qualify her as a witness. We finish stipulation to CV, but not as her qualification. I will place her, then I will request that she be found qualified. I'll tender her, the court finds her qualified, and we will place her on the stand to testify about photographs 12 through 26. 27 and 28 will be again, she will be referring to the report and the CV, written, is there, the stipulation, as far as her qualifications. Yes.
No.
Not for the trial, just for this hearing.
Okay, first.
State Health Special Agent Brian Fraser.
Say your name.
Brian Fraser.
Solemnly swear upon testimony about to give you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, sir.
Yes, sir. I do.
Sit right there and speak in your mouth.
Please state your name
Brian Fraser,
and where are you employed?
Tennessee Bureau of Investigation.
What is your position there?
I'm a special agent criminal investigator,
And how long have you been in that position?
16 years.
As part of your assignment at the TBI, did you assist in an investigation into the disappearance of Evelyn Boswell in February of 2020?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
What was your role in that investigation?
The Sullivan County Sheriff's Department called TBI requesting assistance, simply to help locate and find the missing person report, which was Miss Boswell. Myself and other agents responded to assist with them.
As part of that investigation, did you interview the defendant on February 25th, 2020?
Yes, ma'am.
And during that interview, did the defendant tell you that Evelyn was dead?
Yes.
And how did she claim that Evelyn died?
She claimed that it was an accidental death, that she and her boyfriend at the time were sleeping in the bed with her. And when they woke up that morning, that she was unresponsive and opined that it was that she had been smothered by the rollover sleeping on her during the night.
And on March 6th, 2020, did you find Evelyn's remains?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Can you please describe to the court how that came to be?
On that date, we received a call from the defendant's father talking about property, a storage shed on the property. That he believed it may have been valuable for us to look at and search, so we did respond and search that. There was a playhouse, a described playhouse behind that we found the body in that playhouse in the trash can.
As soon as you recognized what you thought could be Evelyn's remains, what did you do?
I made a call through our chain of command, also to the ETSU Forensic Pathology Department. Dr. Smith and Ms. Parsons responded to assess the crime scene.
And who, if anyone, directed the process of collecting that evidence?
Dr. Smith, the forensic pathologist.
Your Honor, if you could please hand the exhibits to Agent Fraley. Agent Fraley, before today's hearing, did you review each of the 26 photographs that are before you there?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And does each of the photographs fairly and accurately show what you saw on March 6, 2020?
Yes, ma'am, they do.
If you would please turn to Exhibit 1.
I'm there.
Does Exhibit 1 accurately depict where the remains were before you collected them?
Yes, they were. They were inside of the trash can.
And do these photographs, 1 through 26, accurately represent the steps that you took to collect and preserve this evidence?
Yes, ma'am, they do.
No further questions.
Thank you.
Peter Freddie, who conducted this search, who was present?
It was myself, Special Agent Grants, detectives from the Sullivan County Sheriff's Department.
Do you recall who was?
Yes, Detective Grants and Detective Michelle.
And four of you?
Yes, sir.
And so, from looking at the exhibits there, the remains were moved outside. Is that, am I viewing those correctly? Did you take everything outside before you?
Yes, sir. So when we opened the playhouse door, there was a trash can and 2 bags of trash that just didn't add up to being there. They looked, this playhouse had not been occupied or played in for, lack of a better term, for many years. A lot of spider webs through my opinion. This trash can, 2 trash bags were just inside the door, and you could tell, I could tell, or it was my belief that they were placed there recently. And by what I mean recently is compared to the other items within the playhouse. So within probably months or weeks possibly, they just looked out of place. By removing those, they were just inside the door 1 to 2 feet. This playhouse had a porch on it, so I would simply remove that from that location inside 2 to 3 feet, 1 to 2 feet, just to the porch 1 to 2 feet outside the door by simply picking it up, raising it, and placing it down on the porch.
And so, at what point during that process do you realize, hey, you need to call this in?
So, from interviewing with Ms. Boswell previously, she had made statements as to a particular trash can that was consistent with this trash can. She had also made specific statements to what the victim was wearing, clothing, which she described as a purple fleece onesie with penguins on it, and that she was wrapped in a gray and white fleece blanket. So after removing the trash can and the bags of trash to the front porch, again, just picking up and turning around and placing on the porch, if I recall correctly, there was a black trash bag on top of the trash can. After removing that, I observed a leg and a foot attached. On top of this trash, wrapped in that same described fleece blanket that was gray and white in color. It was consistent with an infant of the described age of the missing victim.
And so then at that point, is your first call to Dr. Smith?
First call was, if I recall correctly, sir, was chain of command, DA's office, and then to the forensic pathologist. I think that was to, she's now director of operations, but at the time she was investigator of law enforcement.
Can you state how much time there was between when you made the discovery and when Dr. Smith got there to take over?
Not specifically without looking at the case file, but I would estimate probably an hour.
Is that something that would be reflected in your notes?
Yes, sir. Or in Agent Gratz's file.
Okay. During that hour, any other individuals appear on the scene?
Yes, many arrived because of the significance of the case, that there had been a lot of detectives, special agents, and others working the case. And there was several that were there.
Let me interrupt you. You said several there. Are we talking about law enforcement officers?
Yes, sir.
Are you aware of anyone who is not a law enforcement officer who did it?
Like I said, DA's office personnel arrived. If there was, I'm not aware of it.
Okay. All right.
But let me rephrase. I think the coroner was called. Outside of that, I'm not really
And then once Dr. Smith arrived and took over, did you continue to remain there?
Yes, I assisted with the decision was made that the processing of the body and the remains was to simply remove everything from the trash can there instead of transporting it to their facility in Johnson City. So I was part of that, and basically that her direction was removing everything by layers as you just go through a trash can until you get to the body that was wrapped in the contents it was wrapped in. But it was laid out there. The body bag was placed, and then we went through that, removing layer by layer until we did get to the body of Evelyn Boswell.
And so, Jim Hudson, you're familiar with all those pictures. It's fair to say that that's a progression. Those pictures are a progression of exactly what you were describing.
It's absolutely, yes, sir, what it is. It goes through each step of, like I said, removing those layers, if you will, until we get to the body of Evelyn Boswell.
And you were present the entire time?
Yes, sir.
And was it you specifically who was removing those layers?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Agent Burke.
Thank you.
Read it.
Yeah, I'll be excused, Ron.
We don't think
John, we call Dr. I'll let her state her name.
Ma'am, state your name.
Darenka Middlestick Bolchin.
You solemnly swear or affirm testimony about to give the truth, whole truth, and the truth.
I do.
First, Your Honor, we call her for the purpose of qualifying her as an expert witness. Again, you stated your name. Where are you employed?
I'm the Chief Medical Examiner for Knox and Anderson County and Medical Director of the East Tennessee Vision Forensic Center in Knoxville, Tennessee.
And how long have you had that position, that title?
The acting chief since 2008, 2010, to county involvement, but I've been in Knoxville since 2002 and started working there as assistant medical examiner for Knox County.
And now I'm going to ask you about your education. We'll come back to a little more information about your employment. Did you attend the complete medical school?
Yes,
And where was that?
That was University of Rijeka, spelled R-I-J-E-K-A in Croatia, 1986, 87. That's where I did my internship, and then that's where I worked as assistant assistant in Department of Pharmacology and Toxicology, where I taught medical students and did research for about 4 years.
And after you completed medical school, did you get additional education?
Yes, I relocated to United States, Chicago area in 1991. I had to complete my studies in pharmacology and neuroscience, and I obtained PhD in neuroscience and pharmacology at Loyola University Medical Center. And during that time, during the last 3 years of that, I also joined the Department of Pathology, where I started training in pathology, anatomic pathology, and neuropathology. And then last year was forensic pathology training at the Cook County Office of the Medical Exam in Chicago.
And are you board certified as a medical physician, as a medical doctor?
Yes, I'm actually licensed to practice medicine in the state of Tennessee. I have active license here. I have inactive license in Illinois. And then I'm board certified in anatomic pathology and forensic pathology.
And are you do you have membership in any medical related societies?
Yes, mostly related to pathology, CAP or College of American Pathologists, ASCP, which is the American Society of Clinical Pathologists. Forensic Pathology Society are mainly Academy of Forensic Sciences and the National Association of Medical Examiners, and I also belong, and I'm actually of the Board of Directors for the Knoxville Academy of Medicine, and also I was the delegate for the Tennessee Medical Association.
And you've published numerous articles regarding the field of pathology, is that correct?
Yes.
As a matter of fact, you've also had a presentation regarding asphyxia in children, is that correct?
Yes, in the presentation on the strangulation cases.
And you stated where you're employed, and you specialize in a particular field of medicine in that area, within that job and that job title.
Right. That my subspecialty is actually forensic pathology, and that's where I'm also certified in.
And if you would explain what is forensic pathology and what do you do as a forensic pathologist?
Forensic pathology is a subspecialty of anatomic pathology, which deals with examinations of tissues and organs taken during surgery, rendering diagnosis, anatomic diagnosis for different illnesses, from infectious diseases to cancer. Forensic pathology actually deals with the performance of autopsies and medical legal death investigation. Medical legal death investigation in the sense that the knowledge how to approach forensic case starts at the scene with the scene investigation, medical legal scene investigation. And then the forensic pathology takes that information along with the postmortem examination, which frequently is a complete autopsy, accompanied by ancillary studies to answer the question to what really happened, what the cause and manner of that is. And forensic pathology actually really focuses on cases when the death is sudden and unexpected without medical attendance or due to violence.
And have you been qualified and testified as an expert in the field of pathology and as in the role of a forensic, as a medical examiner?
Forensic pathologist, yes.
And in Tennessee?
Yes, many counties, because we cover about 23 surrounding counties in the autopsy service.
That would be Knox County, Northeast Tennessee, and in Sullivan County. Have you been qualified previously?
Yes, actually, I've been here on a couple of cases, yes.
So, Your Honor, if you do have the stipulated CD, which also has more detailed publications and societies and other information, at this time we would move to have Dr. Mushler qualified as an expert in the field of forensic pathology.
Mr. Crowley? No objection, Judge. Should be declared to be an expert in forensic for purposes of this one.
Your Honor, I'm also going to refer to exhibit number 28, which is the amended report of Dr. Mushler as well, which we will discuss briefly, but it is there and it contains her findings and the information she relied on in those findings. So we'll start with that, Dr. Mushler. Could you review case materials that were provided by the state, our office, regarding the death of Evelyn Boswell?
Yes.
And what materials did you review briefly?
The materials involved all the investigative information, including the law enforcement and also the Office of the Medical Examiner, specifically the Forensic Center, forensic autopsy, the scene photographs, the autopsy photographs, and then, of course, the results of any ancillary studies such as histology, x-rays, and any other.
And all those items are detailed in your report.
That's correct.
And that includes the autopsy report of Dr. Schmidt, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, based on your review of the case and your experience and training, did you form an opinion about the cause and manner of death of Evelyn Boswell?
Yes.
And can you state that within a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Yes.
And what is your opinion as to the cause of death?
So I stated that I was a little bit more specific with Dr. Schmidt who performed the autopsy, and I stated that the cause of death was asphyxia with 4 different mechanisms being present, and the manner of death was homicide.
And you refer to in the asphyxia as it's a combination of positional, confined space, traumatic compressions, and medical via smothering with aluminum foil over the head as the tops of asphyxia. Is that correct?
That's correct, and I called the last that you described as a mechanical, yes.
And can you just briefly define those terms for the court for the purpose of this hearing?
So the asphyxial death essentially means that there was a lack of oxygen that prevented this child from breathing and caused her death. The mechanisms and the 4 main mechanisms that I listed, positional is because she was upside down in a trash can with the inability of the lungs and the diaphragm to function properly. Confined space because there was a trash can with a really very limited capacity that was actually also inside the trash can. She was inside the trash bag, and then on top of that she was also wrapped in a blanket, which would create confined space asphyxia with the lack of sufficient oxygen coming to her. And finally, mechanical and traumatic sometimes can overlap, but mechanical means that there was a mechanical obstruction to the airway, upper airway, which pertains to the foil and the blanket being wrapped around the head tightly. And then traumatic meaning that because of the bent, kind of reverse S shape, that she was sort of compressed in the can. Actually, that would cause compression not only on the diaphragm but also on the chest wall, the ribs and the intercostal muscles that would not actually move efficiently to enable her to breathe. So that would be final traumatic asphyxia, inability for her chest to expand.
And you had reviewed the autopsy report, as you stated, of Dr. Schmidt. Did you agree with her opinions and her findings?
Yes, I agreed. It was a well-done autopsy. The description, there was nothing that I could object to. Was correct and detailed. And the only, I guess, slight difference is in the sense that Dr. Schmidt called because of that kind of homicidal cause of death, left it kind of open with the focus on essentially asphyxial component. And I just went a little more specific because of the way how she was positioned, packaged, and wrapped and found at the scene.
Is it your opinion, within a reasonable degree of medical certainty, that Evelyn was not killed by being rolled over by an adult?
No, she was too old for that. I've never seen a case of a 14-month-old being rolled over by an adult of average size.
So when we're talking about asphyxiation, we're not talking about that when a child's rolled over by an adult.
No, we're not talking about the accidental asphyxia. Accidental asphyxia happens in our field, actually, unfortunately, quite often in small infants with unsafe sleeping environment conditions. But she's too old for that, she's too big for that, and the environment described how she was found was not conducive to that sort of rollover death.
Now, I want to talk to you in general before we get to 12 to 26. I want to ask you a few questions in general about the photographs that we have here. You do have copies of all those photographs of Exhibit 1 through 26. Is that correct?
Yes.
So let me ask you, how important were the photos in assisting you in determining the cause and manner of death?
Well, they're crucial, and whenever I testify in court and answering that question, I always say that the forensic autopsy cannot be done in vacuum. Forensic autopsy actually starts at the scene, and the investigative information and the scene information is actually crucial, not only how to, not just to make it a case of medical examiner jurisdiction, but also how to conduct the investigation, and then especially is important in determining the manner of death.
And I want to ask you, how did the photos, and again, in general sense, assist you in forming an opinion as to the manner of death? When we step back, we talked about the manner of death, but what was the cause of death? We talked about the cause of death, but not the manner of death. And what was your finding within a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
The manner of death was a homicide because, unlike accidental asphyxia, Evelyn could not put herself in that particular position. It had to be action of an adult to create that environment for a positional confined space mechanical and traumatic asphyxia.
So, in a general sense, how did those photographs, in a general sense, help you form an opinion regarding manner of death and cause of death?
So the photographs, scene photographs, and the autopsy photographs are actually our evidence. That's how we objectively document what we describe and what we find. And then in cases of asphyxia, which are always complex cases to work up, they're really crucial in explaining and detailing the not just the cause, but then the mechanism of asphyxia.
Did the photographs show the means and manner of the placement of the body in the trash can?
That's correct.
And did they also show the location of the body in relation to the trash can?
Yes,
And the position of the body in the trash can?
that's correct.
And the location of the blanket that you've referred to, it's been referred to in previous testimony that you found, is that
That's
correct?
correct.
And the location of aluminum foil and the amount of aluminum foil.
Yes, and how it was applied,
The
yes.
photographs showed the size of the baby, the child, and the location of the trash can in relation to the child. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
And the condition of the body at the time that the child was discovered.
Yes, and that's why we always say they have to be done sequentially, detailed in orderly fashion, because that's how investigation actually proceeds, and the documentation has to be accurate.
And because this child was in a trash can with other items, there was a decompositional byproducts, and those photographs helped you see what they were and their contact with the foil and the blanket and the effect that would have on the body. Is that correct?
That's correct, because unfortunately there was advanced decomposition present, and with that there's a lot of artifact that can be created, but that can also shift and change the relationships between these objects and the body, and that's very important to document, because the purge fluid, the fat liquefaction, the presence of maggot larvae and the pupae, and their activity actually, or documentation of their activity, is very important to be seen and understood, because that can actually change and kind of shift some of those coverings and create a potentially false picture how really she was originally kind of packaged in that trash can.
Were the photos relevant to establishing the layers of materials on the child?
Absolutely, and that's why our approach is always, whether it's done at the scene or whether it's done in the forensic center, all of those elements have to be taken with the body under the jurisdiction of the medical examiner, and then approached layer by layer and photographed as such.
Now, I want to ask you your opinion, if you have one. Would the photographs assist jurors in determining the manner of cause of death?
Absolutely, I think they're crucial, because the reading of a report or listening to me or Dr. Schmidt talk about it, I don't think it really would create a proper picture of what was really found at the scene. And especially because the trash can argument can always be found that trash cans and trash bags can have foil, and they can have all different other elements and debris from maybe food or whatever. That's why I think it's very important to see that these are all real elements associated with her death, and then they have to be present and shown as such for the jury to understand how they were originally applied and the shift that happened, why it happened, and that can be explained to them.
And with these photographs, Agent Fraley talked about the progression in stages and collection, photographing the evidence of this child. Would the photographs assist in understanding that progression in those stages of evidence retrieval, collection? Would it assist them in that manner?
Absolutely, and they also show that nothing was staged, nothing was made up. This is all real, in real time removal of the evidence, documentation of that evidence, and submission of the evidence under a chain of custody, because that's another important part of the workup of a case like that the chain of custody is maintained, and that the documentation is proper, and it can be objectively then retrieved at any point in time, including the legal proceedings.
Would the photographs assist jurors in determining the elements of crime, things like whether it was accidental or whether it was intentional?
Absolutely, yes.
And would it help them visualize what you've described from a testimony that's been elicited by either the state or the defense attorney with the court?
Yes.
And would your testimony, in your opinion, be by itself be adequate to articulate your findings before a jury as an expert witness?
I think a lot of those elements would be lost because for example, I'm a very visual person, and unless I see it myself, I might miss some important elements of the entire case. How she was found and what was really involved in the recovery of the body, and therefore also understanding of 4 different mechanisms of asphyxia. I think all of that might get lost in just me talking, especially I'm a fast talker. And I think maybe that would definitely affect their ability to follow and understand exactly what was really involved in the death of Evelyn.
Now, as to photos 1 through 11, they've been stipulated and they're not an issue. But I want you to, if you can, describe how they relate, again, in the general sense, to the remaining photos that are that are an issue. If you can explain how those first 11 kind of set the other 12 through 26 in context.
So in the forensic field in general, there's a big discussion as far as how the evidence can be presented, or the findings of the scene can be presented, and then especially to forensic pathologists. And that's why there are certain laws and there are certain rules in our field that number one, the state of Tennessee, or any state for that matter that has a medical examiner system, the moment, I know it kind of sounds pretty cold, but the body, the serum belongs to the medical examiner and cannot be manipulated without the medical examiner, forensic pathologist being present. And that's actually one of the reasons why we do it the way we do it. With that, that reassures the court or the legal system that things are done under the supervision of the individual who is in charge of that body, and that's the medical examiner, forensic pathologist. And then the next level is that how I'm going to actually describe that the child was not just swallowed in the blanket, but actually it was covered in a blanket with the face being completely covered in a thick fleece blanket. I can talk about it, but I think the jury has to see that to understand that this is not just haphazard blanket on top of a child or swallowed child. This is actually a child whose face and head are wrapped in a blanket that is actually on top of foil that also wraps the upper part of the body, including the head very tightly. And I think that needs to be shown to the jury to understand actually the gravity of the situation, how she was found, and why would that pertain to, for example, mechanical mechanism of asphyxia. And then, of course, positioning of that body, how she was found, not just upside down, but in that contorted position that would prevent her from breathing. And just kind of overall disposal of this child, I think, is remarkable. For forensic pathologists, just to see a decomposed child in an autopsy room, on the autopsy table, would this pretty much create, depending on the case, the different findings? I think the scene, especially on a 6-year-old death, is crucial to show how all of that ties into the cause and manner of death, and especially elements of the report that are just purely objective medical findings. And I think that's why the jury needs to see the scene and all the kind of levels and then phases of body recovery.
And you heard Agent Frederick's testimony that he came and he moved the trash can simply from the inside door to the porch, and then forensic pathology came and directed it. And there's photographs, like in one shows it's in a trash can. Is that the fact that it shows the progression, the stage, and the location of the body from the initial examination in those photographs? Are those important to set up what you see in 12 through 26?
That's correct, yes. There was a minimal manipulation until the medical examiner came in and directed the body recovery.
Is it also important the fact that those photographs, if you have an opinion, that they show the body with accuracy and clarity? And those photographs, in your opinion, for your purpose of testifying today, and when you begin to make your findings, did you find the photographs that they were clear and accurate based on the reports and information you had?
Yes.
Okay. So with that, I'm going to start with photo 12, and Your Honor, I'm going to ask you, do you want me to go question her about photo 12 and then have cross-examination after, or do you want me to go through all the questions, all the photographs, and then have Mr. Strolls come and ask collectively afterwards?
I think go through all of them.
Okay.
Let Mr. Strolls.
Come back, okay. I just want to make sure.
If I can interrupt, Jim, I apologize. Ms. Boswell has been talking to me during this testimony. Part of our problem that we indicated earlier was that she's not going through these pictures, and she would like the opportunity to do that. She's asking if we hold the testimony and allow her the opportunity to at least look through these pictures.
We'll take 15-minute break. We've got 15 minutes.
We're being recessed for 15 minutes.
Action can actually shift some of these layers, but despite of that, the formula is so tightly applied that actually none of that happened in the area of the head and face. It was so tightly actually wrapping the upper body area. And then finally, also shows the confirmation, of course, that's her, because part of her onesie is visible in this corner. That's kind of a common theme throughout all of these photographs, that we know it's her. Now, the rest of her body has not been manipulated yet, which is kind of very important, because when we finally move to the next stage and move off the blanket, which is clearly visible in this photograph, that's going to show us actually exactly how she was positioned, how she was discovered before her body kind of rectified and put in the anatomic position, which would be the only position that we can do forensic examination, forensic autopsy at the end of this whole process.
Doctor, can you state the kind of asphyxiation that is involved in demonstrating or shown in this particular photograph, Exhibit 12?
So that will also go with the some parts of the confined space asphyxia, because obviously that the foil and the plastic bag and the garbage can, they're all different layers of that confined space. Mechanical asphyxia, because it's tightly applied to her face along with the blanket, so that would be mechanically prevent oxygen from entering her upper airway. And then parts of or factors in traumatic asphyxia is just the position of the body. We can see some of that position of the body because the head is very overextended, tilted, and then essentially part of her arm that it's starting to show in this photograph is at the level of the feet, which are at the bottom of this whole body. So it shows at least 3 elements or mechanism of the asphyxia in this particular photograph.
And very briefly, you mentioned purge fluid. Would you explain what that term means?
So the autolysis or breakdown of the tissue after death and the creation of decomposition kind of chemicals, they liquefy the soft tissues, including the fat, and some of the purge fluid comes mostly from the internal organs and then releases from the body originally and initially through the facial orifices or opening in the face, such as the nose and the mouth. And then later on throughout the decomposition, actually, when the epidermis of the first layer of skin detaches, then some of that fluid can start oozing from the rest of the body, and that can compromise the integrity of the body and the integrity of all the layers in a case like this quite extensively. And that's why the removal has to be done very carefully, layer by layer, and then with extreme care not to remove soft tissues from the body where these layers are tightly applied, whether it's clothing or the blanket or the aluminum foil in this particular photograph.
And when you talk about compromising post-mortem or positioning, you mean that if not for the fluid, that actually aluminum foil or the blankets would even be tighter across the face and the head of the body?
That's correct.
And also, would it be correct to say that the more fluid you have in the decomposition that you talked about would be consistent with the body being in that position, in that location, a longer amount of time, the more decomposition you have in the amount of purge fluids. Is that correct?
That's correct. And then that's part of the series of photos that shows the differential decomposition in her body, which is important in this context of the case and how she was positioned. Because there was a soft decomposition and purge fluid in the upper part of the body, and then desiccation, drying out, almost what we call mummification in the lower parts of the body, but that's because the body was upside down and it was not manipulated after that. It was left put in that position or left in that position throughout its postmortem interval.
And we'll go to photo exhibit number 13. What is significant for the purpose of this hearing?
So the significance essentially, again, is that the evidence has to be taken layer by layer, sequential fashion. Finally, most of the foil is, looks like it's removed. It shows the imprint of decomposition fluid in parts of the foil that are covering the scalp and the face. And then the next phase now is removal of the blanket that is tightly applied to the face, because in one of the subsequent photographs, we're going to see actually the face itself and how the blanket left the imprint of the pattern on the face, meaning that it was in that position and compressing the face and against the wall of the garbage trash can for a prolonged period of time during the postmortem interval. Another thing that really emerges now in this photograph is that her head is completely tilted. The back of the head is actually touching the upper back, and the shoulder and the arm are bent, and they're at the level actually of her gluteal area, of her buttocks, and then essentially that's how she's kind of twisted in a reverse letter S shape, and that's in that shape now. It's emerging as we are now removing the blanket from her.
Would that be an example of traumatic and mechanical asphyxiation?
That's correct. The thick layers of the blanket, that it's kind of folded over the face, and then also the position of the body in this S shape and the upside down position, and that would be traumatic component.
And this is something the child would not be able to do on its own. This would be done by a person, another individual would have to be consistent with that. Would it be correct?
That's correct. To be packaged like this, positioned like this, and in that particular location, that it has to be an adult.
Number 14, could you again explain we have a description, but would you explain the significance of this photograph?
So finally, the foil is removed, which is then submitted separately as an evidence. The staining inside the foil, you can see where the scalp is, where the face is, which is a little bit a darker area, and that's because a lot of purge fluid is going to have some blood elements in it, and it's going to look like blood, because it does contain blood. And then, of course, the severe overextension of her head and neck area is really emphasized in this particular photograph, being against her back, and then her now right upper arm is exposed, and then the next is going to be removal of the blanket.
Does this photograph again corroborate by taking another layer, showing just how tightly applied the aluminum foil and how snug that it was to the head?
Yes, it was snug, it was voluminous, and then on top of that now we are emphasizing the unnatural overextension or reverse letter S shape of the body, how it was placed in the trash bag in the trash can.
Would this be consistent with traumatic and mechanical and positional asphyxiation?
Yes.
So next we'll go to exhibit number 15. Again, I'll ask you the same question. What is significant in this photograph?
So the significance now is just that the close-up of that particular position of the child, that now the blanket remains in a certain position before it's removed, and it's just a close-up that shows better now where the head is, where the occipital, the back of the head is, in the relationship to the right shoulder, to the upper back, and then to her to her behind, and then the feet there kind of emerging, because essentially what was on the right-hand side of this photograph is what was originally presented at the scene in the trash can, because that was the kind of up or the top layer
So-
after the black bag was removed.
So this would, again, represent another stage of examining the child, and another stage in determining the cause in the matter of death. Would that be fair
That's
to say?
correct. And then also what's seen now better is that in the body pouch, that all of this is now happening in order to contain the evidence and keep it kind of clean and separate from the rest of the environment, is that you can see there is still a lot of that of purge and body fluid being released, all that yellow-brown staining that is on the blanket and also in the pouch essentially means there is still active decomposition taking place. And it's still happening after such a prolonged period of time because of the confined space, because there was not so much easy access to the flies, and there's some, but not as many as she would have been exposed to without being in confined space.
So this shows a continued shift of the foil and the blanket, which is again the compromise or post-mortem positioning. Would that be fair to say? This again shows you another stage within the development of uncovering this body. Is that correct?
Yes, essentially it explains close up why the lower body and the legs are still kind of wrapped, where the upper body there's a shift in the blanket, and that's happening because of decomposition fluid and fat liquefaction that is actually creating kind of semi-liquid slick environment that is going to remove or starting to remove or shift these elements.
Now we go to number 16, and again, if you would tell the court the significance of this photograph.
So this is essentially the same position, the same stage, however, it's a different angle. And from this angle, it can be appreciated where the back of her head is in relationship to her back and the gluteal or area buttocks. And then you can see also the skid-resistant texture of the foot. That's actually kind of foot under her, a little behind, and that's essentially what was originally presented at the scene.
Would this show another, I guess, a little more clearly the natural kind of folding and positioning, compressing of the body?
Yes, that's bilateral folding in addition to the upside down position and the compression, yes.
And would this be considered traumatic and mechanical and positional asphyxia?
Yes, this actually corroborates the positional and the traumatic asphyxia in the trash can.
And I believe in your report you talk about compaction. Is this an example of compaction? Is that what this is?
Yes, just because of the unnatural folding of the body, yes. And overextension.
Then we go to number 17, exhibit number 17. And again, I'll ask you.
So this is the third photograph taken from the same stage in recovery and removal, but the front of the body is now presented with the blanket being over the face, and that's essentially going to set the stage for the following photograph that shows the imprint of the blanket and kind of deformity of the facial features because of the compression of the blanket and the trash bag and the trash can. The amount of decomposition fluid that would compromise some of these relationships, and why actually the blanket did shift in some areas of the upper body, and it's just a different angle that corroborates the findings and why the blanket is found in the condition that it was in.
And again, I'm going to ask your opinion within reasonable degree of medical certainty. Would this be inconsistent, or would it be consistent with a haphazard action, or would this be consistent with a deliberate action based on what you can see in this photograph from this angle?
So in none of these stages, there's no haphazard. Actually, this was like a really well packaged application, and the positioning of the foil of the blanket in the trash can and within the trash can.
So
trash
this would
bag
be
and trash can.
mechanical asphyxiation, is that correct?
Yes, the face was compressed, so that would be part of the mechanical. Yes.
And then that takes us to number 18. If you could explain what is shown and the significance in this photograph.
So that will be the next stage in recovery, where the blanket is now being removed. The lower body, kind of the ankles and the legs are crossed, and they're against the lower part of the buttock of the gluteal region. Her right upper arm is visible, and then of course the folding of the head and neck actually really stands out in this particular photograph before the blanket is removed from the face.
Is this child in a fetal position?
She's kind of in distorted fetal position, and distorted meaning that there's overextension of the head and neck area in a very unnatural way that should prohibit even an adult person from breathing, let alone a child.
So this was not something the child would naturally have been into. This would have been something that, again, you say manipulated in mechanical means?
Yeah, that's correct. She's overextended with her head, back of the head touching the back in a kind of really extreme extension.
Would this require some amount of force to put the child in that fetal position?
So I cannot really tell at which stage she assumed this, because some of this position could be just because of the post-mortem position of the body, with her kind of lower parts compressing, with her own weight compressing her and pushing her down. So some of that would be actually the weight of her own body in that trash bag, in the trash can, kind of. But obviously, she had to be put in the position with the overextension of the face and head to begin with, in order for the rest of the body then to push down, and they create kind of more severe bending.
Would this again be a mechanical and traumatic asphyxia?
Yes.
So now we go to exhibit number 19. And what is the significance in this photograph?
So that will be the next stage, where the blanket is being carefully removed from the face, and then again, it has to be done like a really done with great care because of the decomposition and layers of the soft tissue, pretty much being attached to the blanket and peeling off during removal. What also stands out in this particular photograph is that her onesie was not zipped, and part of her leg and her body is kind of exposed. She did wear a diaper, disposable diaper, so that was kind of really unusual as far as the some of the testimony how she might have been found originally. And
so you're saying the fact that her clothes were disarrayed and unzipped would be consistent with that? In your opinion, is that?
That's correct. Yes, I would call this kind of clothes in disarray, in the sense that, yes, she's completely unzipped and part of the body is exposed, yes.
And as we go through 19 through 22 are basically as we get to each one, because you've reviewed these beforehand, they show, these are basically showing a progressive removal of the blanket.
That's correct, yeah, that's progressive removal of the blanket, in particular from the head and neck area, because of the tight application and the, any careless or fast removal would actually compromise the features and remove parts of the soft tissue from her face and head.
So 19 through 22 then show this slow removal because the whole point is not to destroy the body.
Yes, to preserve as much soft tissue or any other elements of the body as much as possible.
And it would be correct to say because of the tightness, then the more careful and tedious removal is required.
That's correct, and that's why I'm saying that part of the comment that it was not haphazardly just placed on top of the blanket or just a blanket on top of her is that it was tightly applied and wrapped. That had to be unwrapped and that kind of.
So that is shown in Exhibit 19. Is that also shown in Exhibit 20? That whole again progressive removal of the blanket.
Yes, and that's sometimes for to an observer this might seem redundant, but to us is very important because it shows a kind of deliberate and careful removal of the evidence that later on we can actually then match with the findings that come from the forensic lab and have explanation for the findings as far as the either DNA or any other matter or evidence for that matter.
Let me ask you this. In number 20 that we're on, it shows the blanket. Does it, in a way that's not been before, demonstrate just how large this blanket is and how thick it is?
Exactly. I mean, that's another, I guess, answer to the question, why would it help jury to see these photographs? Because there are different types of blankets, there are different types of fleece. However, this particular blanket was very, very thick and plied and actually kind of double layer on the face, and it was tightly applied on the face. It required actually pretty prolonged careful removal, and I think that the jury would appreciate, although it's not a pleasant view, they would appreciate actually the position of the child and then the packaging of the child with all the elements surrounding her.
And I assume that thicker fleece, larger fleece, wrapped more securely around the face would exacerbate the asphyxiation.
It would make it hard to breathe. That's for
Harder
sure.
to breathe.
Yes.
And so 19 through 21, we'll go to 21, they're all from mechanical and traumatic asphyxiation, is that correct?
Yes, and also confirms again the position of the body, which was not forced in any. So pretty much, what's important to also note is that during all this removal, her body is as is. Nothing has been moved or manipulated, shifted as far as the extremities or the head and neck area, which is going to be important when we comment on some of these subsequent photographs as far as her positioning.
And then in number 21, does it also show a view of the onesie or the clothing I guess in the amount of the clothing in a way that the other photographs have not?
Yes, it completely confirms that, yeah, that's her clothes originally described with the penguin pattern, purple color.
Does that assist the jury in seeing how the size of this child by looking at the size of the onesie, trying to get some idea of what kind of clothing this child could fit into and what, in some manner, would that assist the jury in that means as well?
Yes, and the size of the child is important because one of the things that we always ask for when we work up death of a child of that age, around the infant age or toddler age, is that we have to always have access to the pregnancy records, birth records, pediatric records, and part of the reason is that we want to confirm that she was developing and growing normally. There were no issues with the pregnancy, there were no issues with delivery, there was no issues with her development and growth in the first year in the infant stage, and that also sets the stage as what's really plausible, not plausible, what can happen to a child of a certain age that is developmentally meeting all the milestones and developing just fine and growing just fine, and whether she'll be susceptible to, let's say, overlaying at the age of 14 months. She wouldn't be, because she's actually a well-developed child.
What is overlaying?
Meaning that would be bed sharing in unsafe sleeping environment with an adult overlaying, or being on top of a child, which I've never had a case of a 14-month-old and overlaying. There was only one, I'll take that back, there was only one case of a 2-year-old when an adult actually laid on top of him in bed on purpose, and that was deemed a homicide.
You did have access to the records of this child. I believe medical records up until her last visit was October or November, is that correct?
That's correct.
And there was nothing remarkable regarding her health or her size in those records. Was there or was there not?
I don't recall any, because I did not really review those records for this particular hearing, for the purposes of this hearing, because it was kind of limited scope and purpose of this hearing. But I don't recall any issues as far as development and reaching the developmental milestones.
That takes us to photo number 22, and just briefly, that again just shows another stage in removal of the blanket and the efforts to not destroy evidence.
That's correct.
Okay. So let's go to number 23. And this is the first photograph really of a close-up of the head of the child. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And why is that important to have a photograph of the bare head exposed?
So there are different reasons. Now, one is, again, we are presenting her body in all different stages as is before she's manipulated. So this shows what I explained, close up, or part of that S, kind of reverse S shape. Well, actually, the way how she presented here, she's like an S shape folding of the body with overextended and actually twisted neck. Also, the part of her onesie that's kind of in disarray, she's not zipped, so this is not a child that she kind of, I guess, dying in her sleep, so to speak, with the fully zipped onesie. And then the second, or the third thing is that compression of the face. Although the composition is pretty extensive and it's disturbing. However, I think it's really important to show how tightly compressed her face was, because even the advanced decomposition, the facial features, pretty much the skeletal and cartilaginous elements are going to kind of maintain some shape and some semblance of the facial features in people. Her facial features are pretty much flattened. I mean, they're completely flattened, or face, so to speak. One can kind of assume where the nose and the head are based on the position of one of the eyelashes, where it is. So that kind of confirms the compression of the face, mechanical asphyxia, parts of the traumatic asphyxia because of the severe twisting of the body, which also goes with the confined space, and that's why part of the reason why she's so twisted. And of course, positional asphyxia, which would pretty much prevent her chest from expanding and breathing. So pretty much it will be close up of how she was found, finally when all the elements are removed, how she presents, and the mechanisms of asphyxia, plus unfortunately that's the only way that we can kind of present her identification photograph. It's not much of an identification photograph, but it's as if of the face that in the end is going to be permanently in her record.
And we talked about the blanket on the face. In this photograph shows something the other photographs haven't. And I think this, maybe the next photograph as well, show the pattern from a blanket.
Yes, the fleece imprint on the face It's especially the right side of the face that is better preserved. That would confirm essentially how she was wrapped, packaged, and then pressed against the sides of the trash can, with a blanket, of course, wrapping the head and face.
With the pattern, again, is that demonstrated in another way that you described that it's wrapped tightly and you can see it move, but with the pattern, is that a form of evidence that really demonstrates that this was close, this was tight enough that on this skin forms really the ridges and the patterns of a blanket?
That's correct.
Is that even more significant to show just exactly how tightly wound this was wrapped around the child's head?
That's correct.
And in 24, again, we have exposure of the head and the closer up. But why is it important that this photograph would be shown to a jury? What would this photograph show that the other photographs have not shown?
So this photograph actually has the head is, so finally now the parts of the body are manipulated to kind of put her in an anatomic position to be properly examined, and then shows essentially how the head and the upper body and the shoulder were actually tightly compressed against each other, and she was so severely twisted that pretty much left a permanent indentation on her torso and on her head, that with deformity that could not be rectified after being put in the anatomic position.
This photograph also shows larva developed around the neck area. What is the significance of that?
So that's one of the factors in this particular kind of slow reveal of the layers is, as I mentioned, that there was a number of pupae and number of larvae. Now, they were not as numerous as we would ordinarily see with the body that is exposed to air and oxygen without any obstruction or any elements that would prevent easy access of the flies to the body. And of course, flies would deposit eggs very, very quickly on a body that started to cool off. So the fact that there's still actually active larvae in this kind of soft decomposition part of the body speaks to the effect now that she was originally tightly packaged and there were no access of the flies to the body. And as the purge fluid and the parts of the body and the cover started to slowly shift, the flies are finally finding their way to the body. So that's why there's discrepancy between the stage of decomposition and the stage in which some of the pupae and larvae are found on the body in different stages as the access to the body is kind of permitted because of the shifting of the covers due to decomposition.
And this would be an example of all four tops of that asphyxiation. Is that correct?
Yes.
And as to number 25, what would this, again, this is a further back photograph of the head, but also the entire body with the onesie. What is the significance? What does that photograph show in distinction from the other photographs we've seen here today?
So those two photographs are now shot after all the other elements are removed. The onesie is the only thing that is now left on her with along with the diaper. And then what's I really appreciated in this particular photograph is that not only was the head and neck twisted in a natural and kind of contorted position, but her chest is actually kind of protruding, and then as the body is now finally being shifted to be put in an anatomic position for further examination, the knees that were compressing actually the area of the diaphragm, the lower chest and upper abdomen now are moving, and you can see how they left the indentation. And that would be another reason for her to not be able to breathe, because the compression to the chest of the diaphragm prevent her, an adult or a child, from breathing. And that's, again, part of the traumatic and positional asphyxia sort of being shown from just releasing the child from that position into the anatomic position. The number of larvae and the pupa actually now can be appreciated, and they are part of the factor why some of the shift did happen, because they can be the larvae, the maggots, essentially they're very aggressive and they can do a lot of damage to the body, post-mortem damage to the body, and they can introduce a lot of artifacts to the body, and they can actually do, because of their aggressive nature, what they do to human body or any living organism. After that, actually, they can do, they can introduce a lot of artifacts and shift some of the clothing or covers on the body, and that's why access to the body later on for the flies was enabled, because they came into different stages.
Finally, we come to the last photograph, number 26. And would this be a description as is photograph?
Yes, that's as is, now from a different part of the onesie that was covering the right side, the left side of the body was partially uncovered. And then it shows as her body is finally being kind of relaxed and put in an anatomic position, kind of the torso now is extended. So now she's essentially being finally manipulated and extended from compressed state into kind of more anatomic position to be examined completely. Because the next stage, and that's shown in photographs that we don't have here, is undressing, and then of course other photographs of her without a diaper in an anatomic position.
Does this photograph show decomposition, post-mortem changes?
Yes, the difference, and actually the differential between the wet decomposition of the upper part of the body, especially the head and neck area that was down toward the bottom of the trash can, and then desiccation or mummification of the part of the body that was up, which would be actually even her hands and the feet, the legs.
So, what I guess what you're saying is the upper body, the head, is wet, and the lower part of the body are dry because the body's upside down. It was
Right.
found upside down.
That's correct, and the purge fluid and the fat liquefaction would actually enable and promote further the wet decomposition.
Would this be consistent in the fact that the body was put upside down within this trash can, within this trash bag,
And left leg.
and
Yes.
and left lying for some kind of period of time upside down?
Yes.
It wasn't changed from the right side position. This would be indicative this body was placed intentionally upside down
And left like that. Yes.
and left like that
Yes.
to allow the purge fluids to flow to the bottom, which would lead to those parts being wet and the upper part being dry.
That's correct, because it looks like the purge fluid did not reach the lower part of the body, the legs or the anogenital region.
Your Honor, that's all I have at this time. Mr. Boswell.
Doctor, I believe you testified to this, but your testimony and your report are not based on an actual autopsy that you performed. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah. I reviewed the autopsy findings and autopsy photographs of Dr. Schmidt.
Okay. And the pictures that we're dealing with here today, are those pictures from the autopsy report that, for Dr. Schmidt, that you relied on?
Yes, everything that was accessible to her, I had access to, yes.
And I believe you said there were others beyond these.
That's
you relied
correct.
on. Now, I noticed in your report there is 3 particular photographs included. Do you have a copy of that in
I
your
didn't bring my
report?
report with me now.
Let me get one of those. You can give me this exhibit. Okay. And Doctor, I believe it's either exhibit 27 or 28 that contains your report.
28.
28.
Yes, sir.
And as I said, there's 3 particular photographs that you've attached as part of your report.
Yes.
Is there significance why you chose those 3?
The significance essentially showed the stages and layering. Essentially, I had some of the kind of similar cases that I would approach the same way because everything that is the body is in and that is intimately involved and associated with the body, essentially belongs to the body and belongs to the medical examiner until released under chain of custody to the law enforcement. So the first one essentially shows that the forensic pathologist medical examiner is there when she's taken out of the trash can, which is very important, because nothing was manipulated and shifted or touched inside that can or inside the bag beforehand. The next, actually, what's really important for me was to show the placement of the foil and how tightly, actually, one can see the outline of the head and upper body with the foil being attached. So it's not crumpled foil from somebody, I don't know, barbecuing or doing something and then putting it next to the child. It's actually wrapped around the upper part of the child, and the blanket, of course, being more prominent down. And then the next is essentially the photograph of the child, one of the last exhibits that we described, 23, 24, because it's the ID photograph with the contortion of the upper body, especially the neck and chest area, exposure of the body, once not being completely on, plus the compression of the left side of the face, plus the outline and the compression, the pattern of the blanket and foil, and then essentially differential decomposition pattern. So it would be impossible to attach it all, but it shows kind of different stages of the handling of Evelyn's body that was kind of importance to the cause and mechanism of that.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's why you chose those three particularly.
Right, so essentially the trash can, the bag, confined space, the foil, the blanket that will be mechanical. The positional actually is kind of its position upside down, but also the contortion of the body. And then finally we have the compression of the face with the blanket and the foil.
Okay. Now, General Stahl has asked you several questions about each of those 26 pictures. Do you think that the three that you have attached to your report adequately describe the progression that you discussed?
The purpose of attaching these three photographs was actually to corroborate the cause and mechanism, and then of course the manner of that. But they are not sufficient. I don't think they're going to be sufficient for the jury to understand exactly how she was found and all the layering and the painstaking effort that took to actually remove all these elements from the body. I think that to understand essentially what I'm talking about, all of these corroborate the cause and manner and mechanism of that, I don't think it would be sufficient to understand essentially the severity of the gravity of the involvement of all these elements in her death.
Okay. So, more specifically, you discussed, well, you're aware, we're only objecting to the pictures from number 12 to number 26.
I'm sorry,
I said you're aware that we're only objecting to pictures number 12 through number 26.
Actually, I wasn't aware of that.
Okay. So that's the ones if we can focus on those.
Okay.
Do you have the pictures there that
Yes,
you can
I do.
refer to? Okay. Is it fair to say that beginning with picture 12 and moving forward, that's where the actual body of Evelyn begins to appear in the pictures?
Emerged, that's correct, yes.
Okay. Now, I believe when you were, if you could turn to number 17. And if you would, when you were testifying, I believe that you stated that that was one of 3 pictures that showed the same stage of the removal of the items
That's correct.
from her. Which are the other 2?
So it seems that exhibit 15, 16, and 17 would be different angles of the same stage.
Okay. Then if you could turn over to number 19. And you may have to help me on this one. In your testimony, you stated that presented some inconsistency with some prior testimony. Do you recall that statement?
I did say something that I guess.
You kind of lost me when you said that. What testimony are you talking about that would be inconsistent with?
Oh, I was referring to actually the state of the dress or undress of the child.
Okay.
That would be inconsistent with simple overlaying.
Okay. So it wasn't actually testimony, just the idea of overlaying.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, then I also noted from your testimony that you said 19 through 22 show the removal of the blanket. Is that a similar situation to 15 through 17? The same thing, just different angles?
No, these are different stages, but it took actually a while to remove the blanket. So there are different angles, but also kind of different stage with careful removal from the front and the back of the body. But essentially, they do all three refer to the removal of the blanket, especially from the head and face area.
Okay. So are all three of those, in your opinion, necessary for a jury to get a full picture of the issues here?
Of the tightness of the blanket application, now whether the court is going to decide to admit all three, that's really not up to me. If forensic pathologists actually, we rely on the photographs, so as far as I'm concerned, I would keep it all.
Right.
But obviously, that's not a question for me.
Right. Okay. And that is the question with here today. And that the next one I want you to look at is number 23. And you gave a very good description of that photograph. But during your testimony, you started off with the statement that it's disturbing, meaning the subject matter is disturbing.
I mean, the whole case is disturbing, so.
I understand. I'm just asking. You made that statement.
Yes, I mean to a jury member, so they have to be properly prepared.
Fair enough. And so then pictures 24, 25, and 26, those show where the body has been manipulated. Is that accurate?
That's correct. Now she's finally being kind of decompressed and then extended slowly to be placed in an anatomic position.
So, and I mean, just the way I translate that, when you say that, that means someone has taken a leg or an arm and moved it.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. And can you explain why you feel those pictures, that don't show the position she was in when she was found, why are those important?
So to me, every case actually needs the identification photograph, although they don't look as a regular group identification photograph, but that is the identification photograph for this child. So it's important to show that. Number two, it also demonstrates the severity of the twisting and the torsion of the head and neck area with the compression of the upper chest. So that's why especially 24 and 25 to me will be important to show and corroborate some of the mechanism of asphyxia. As far as the 26, I mean, I guess at this particular stage when she's already being undressed and kind of repositioned, that's one that I could definitely testify without. That's your question. But I think the 24 and 25 would be important to corroborate some of the testimony that I would offer.
Now, in this question, I'm just going to ask you to explain this because I don't understand what you mean. You stated a couple of times that larvae can introduce artifact.
Maggots, yes.
Okay, I don't understand what that means.
They're actually very aggressive and they create defects in the skin, they burrow in the skin, they enter the body, they invade the airways, the gastrointestinal tract, and create essential destruction of the soft tissue. So that's what I meant.
So the term artifact means it's
They
damaged.
create a lot of artifact, and that's one of the reasons why either Dr. Schmidt or I could not go beyond the, she said homicidal, and I basically stated asphyxia. I could not corroborate blunt force trauma to the soft tissue because of the maggot larva activity.
Okay, all right. Since you mentioned that, you said several times that the child's head was overextended.
Yes.
When you say that, does that signify an injury?
So it signifies the injury in terms of the positional and the traumatic asphyxia, as far as her head being essentially twisted, contorted, pushed to the back. That would actually cannot even talk normally in that position because of the compromised airplane.
Okay. But there's no indication from yours or Dr. Schmidt's review of this that there was any mechanical injuries.
We could not actually, either she doing the autopsy or me reviewing the photographs and actually slides, because there was actually enough preserved organs and tissues to create a glass slide that we can look under the microscope. So the stage of decomposition and then invasion by the larva was such that would actually compromise any blunt force trauma to the soft tissue. So we didn't find skeletal trauma, but that doesn't mean that there was no soft tissue trauma or the brain trauma, but that could not be commented on because of the stage of decomposition and the maggot infestation.
Could you tell if there was any skeletal injuries?
We did not find skeletal injuries. I reviewed the x-rays and there were, I couldn't find any.
Now, you also testified that part of the child's position could have been post-mortem, meaning her own weight compressing her. Is that accurate?
So yes, a complete kind of accordion-like position that she was. The body undergoes changes first of becoming stiff and then becoming lax, and then of course, obviously she was put in that position because before she became stiff, otherwise she would never assume that position. But and that's why that would corroborate her dying in that position, asphyxial death. But then after that, once the rigor or rigidity is gone and then the body essentially is upside down, some of that shift could happen because of or more of the compression would happen because of the sheer weight of the body.
Okay. And can you say how much of that compression happened due to her own weight?
I don't know because she's decomposed right now, but I can tell you that she would not get in that position just because of sheer weight, if that's what you're asking. As far as the contortion, the twisting, and the compression to the chest, none of that will happen just because of the sheer upside down position of the weight.
Okay, all right. Judge, I believe that's all the questions I have.
Redirect.
One question. The reason, if I understand it correctly, the reason you can determine whether or not there were soft tissue injuries, blunt force injuries, is because of the decomposition of the body.
Yes.
So it doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means because of the time between the death and the finding of the body, that evidence disappeared.
Too much artifact was introduced that would prevent us from seeing or commenting on them.
That's all.
Mr. Ross.
No, Judge.
Doctor, thank you. Ms. Stephanie. Is she free to go?
Yes.
Yes, Judge.
Doctor, you're released from your stand before you go.
Thank you.
Your Honor, we were asked